Woo! Hi, I'm mizzy, the artist and rigger, and today I wanted to share how I do my eye rigging in Live2D Cubism. Please excuse my voice and my recording. I am very new to this, but I'm trying my best. Anyways, here we have a little bold chinchilla chibi that I designed for this demo. She's so cute. In this tutorial, I'll be covering eye blink, eye movement, and eye physics for them jigglies. Yeah. So personally, I like to start all my rigs off with the eyes, just because I duplicate the left eye and flip it to be the right eye. I find it's less hassle for this with doing the face angles later. It just makes my life much easier and work more efficient. Okie dokie, so first I already did all the meshing. I'm really not good at meshing. I'm not an expert at it. So I won't be going into that today. But I will start with the deformer hierarchy. Yay! So remember, as a pro tip, physics deformers go inside main body deformers. For example, I make an eyelash physics deformer and then make an eyelid physics deformer with the eyelash physics deformer inside it. And then I make an eyelid XY deformer with the eyelid physics deformer inside that one. And then the eyelid XY deformer goes inside to the IL overall deformer. I find this way means there's no contradictions in the physics and nothing gets skewed. But this is just how I do it. So if you find your own better way, use that. Okie dokie, so onto the parameters. I start with the IL open default parameter and make keyforms at the 1.0, 0.85, and 0.0 mark first. The 0.85 acts as a buffer for the blink, so it'll open for longer and you won't need to sit there with your eyes like wide, pinned open. But this is just how I do it. And within the parts that I keyform into this are the whites, the eye line, the corner, the bottom lash line, the eyelid, the lashes, and sometimes I'll keyform the iris in, but I didn't in this one. So, typically I start by rigging the lash line and dragging it downwards to just before the bottom line finishes. And then I squish it inwards and curve it downwards using the Deform Path Pen tool. This is a really handy tool for parts like the eyeline, the lashes, and the mouth. It comes really handy for the mouth. And then I just use the same tool, the Deform Path tool, to squish the bottom line upwards a little bit and basically hide it behind the lash line. Just because you don't need to see that when your eye is closed. And then I just squish the eye corner in and use the detail points and the brush, deform brush, to squish it all inwards and make it look as smooth as possible in a line. Now you don't need to be a perfectionist with it, because from afar you won't really see all the details of blinking. But you know, it's nice to have it look all linear and in a line. And then I'll just make sure to constantly go back and check by sliding the parameter slider, just to make sure everything looks nice and smooth from going to the close to the open. Okay, And then I go on to the eyelashes and I flip the lashes so they're upside down and drag them downwards as well. Just have to make sure that they haven't moved sideways too much because eyelashes don't move sideways. But the flip gives it a really nice illusion of the eye closing, so I just like to add it. And then the eye whites are squished in and hidden behind the eye line, but try not to deform it too much, because if it's too out of shape and too far from essentially the middle of the eye white, when the eye opens, you'll have these gaps between like the top of the eyelid, the corners, and the bottom. So just making sure it's as linear as possible when you're squishing it really helps later on. So once I'm happy with the eye closed at 0.0, I keyform 0.5 for the half open eyes. Now adding this after you've already done the eye closed saves a lot of time because it gives you the foundation of the half close. So the eye line is essentially already where it needs to be, so you just need to make some really fine detail adjustments to make sure everything just looks as smooth as possible, and then you're good to go. It really, really helps to do this step after you've done the eye closed. And I just adjust everything so it looks smooth and there's no glaring gaps between the 1 and 0 keys for a much smoother blink. I did have to adjust eyelashes because having them flipped gave a weird illusion that they weren't attached to the eye line. So what I did was I just Control-Shift-C on 1.0 parameter with the 2 lashes selected, and then I Control-Shift-V on the 0.5 keyform, and that just copies and pastes the position to the new keyform, which just helps to reset the part essentially. So it makes it easier to rig and makes it easier to have everything in a line and with no gaps and no weird squishes. I've also recently started to add the eyebrows into the blink. I find this creates a much more natural blink because if you think about it, when you blink, it's not just your eye muscles that move, the top of your eyebrows also move when you blink, so I just find it much easier and it adds a really nice effect when you add the eyebrows into the blink. Okay, so now onto the eyeball X and Y parameter. This is for your eyeball movement for your tracking. So I created a deformer called Iris XY, and I added all of the eye highlights and the iris itself into this deformer. And I just keyed it with a 3-point key to the eyeball X and Y parameters. For X, I just drag the deformer left and right respective to the keyform, and ever so slightly adjust the perspective using the red box. I find that this creates a slight illusion of the iris curving, and because your eyeball is not flat, it's a ball. So it just gives that really nice effect. And always make sure to try and have them move left and right about the same amount. I also changed the Bezier edit type to smooth 2 because eyes. This helps with curves, like giving that curved effect. For the Y parameter, I do the same basically, just up and down with the -1.0 key being down and the 1.0 key being up. And I again use the red box to help with the perspective shifts. And then I just synthesize the corners. And then I add the eyelid XY deformer that I made, which contains the lashes, eyeliner, eyelid, and I just slightly follow the direction of the iris with it. So just squishing it left for when we're looking left and squishing it right for when we're looking right. I find that this again helps mimic a more natural eye, because again, when you're moving your eyes, it's not just your eyeball that moves, but the surrounding muscles also move. So it just makes a much more natural movement, in my opinion. And again, for the Y, I do similarly, following the eye down and then following it up, but not too much because we're going to add eyelid physics later and you don't want it to interfere too much with that. And once you're happy with the movement of the eyelids, don't forget to link and synthesize those corners, otherwise you'll have funky moving eyes. Okay, so once I'm happy with the overall movement of the eye, I move on to the jiggler physics. I like to start with the eyelash L physics, which I made using a parameter from -1 to 1 and adding a 3-point keyform. I use deformers for each eyelash separately for this. So when the keyform is at -1, I curve the eyelash around to the left. And then I do the opposite for the right. I curve the eyelash around to the right. Not too much, and you don't want to move the bottom of the lash too much, otherwise you'll get a strange jiggling look in the physics window later, which you really don't want. It looks like the eyelashes aren't attached. It's quite simple, but I find it gives a really cute effect in the physics of just flowing eyelashes. I also decided to add in the corner eyelash into this, and I give it an ever so slight curve to the left and right, just for a tiny little extra bounce, because you're gonna get those bouncy physics in. And then once I'm happy with the eyelash physics, I usually move on to the eyelid physics. So what I use for this is the same parts from the eyelid XY, but this deformer is just a child deformer of that one. And this is the physics set that helps with that bouncing closed eye effect. So I use another parameter from -1 to 1, and for the -1 keyform, I pull the parts down slightly and outwards, and then for the 1 keyform, I do the opposite. I pull them upwards and inwards, and I find that this creates a really nice closing effect for when you blink. It gives that ever so slight bounce, adds a bit of a buffer. And again, I just find it adds a bit more of a natural look to the whole shape. So once I'm happy with that, I move on to everyone's favorite, the eye highlight jiggles. So I don't use deformers for these, I just use the actual parts. And what I do is on a parameter again from -1 to 1. At the -1, I curve it around and to the left. So it's to the left and upwards slightly. And then for the right, I curve it around to the right and upwards again. Just following the shape of the eye, really. There's no hard and fast rules for this. It's just whatever you think looks good, but I like them to kind of circle around the eye with a bit of a jiggle. I find that the extended interpolation helps make this much smoother. But yeah, just play around. It depends on what kind of highlights you have. Maybe if you had a heart-shaped highlight, you might want to make it bigger and smaller depending on when your eye blinks and opens. I've seen some cool fish type eyes where the fish will swim backwards and forwards. That's always cool. And spiral eyes. So yeah, it all depends on what you're feeling at the time. But I find my favorite one to do is this circle type motion. I find it makes a really pretty effect in the physics window later. And this is why it's really important to have all of your eye parts separated, like the highlights, from the main iris, so that you can add these cool little jiggle effects later. If it's all one, you won't be able to add this kind of stuff in. So if you're a rigger, make sure you speak to your artist about how to separate. And if you're a client, make sure you talk again to your artist. Make sure they know how to separate everything properly for the smoothest jiggles you'll ever find. Okay, so once I'm happy with the highlight jiggles, I move on to make the actual eye jiggle bounce. This is my favorite bit. So in a deformer, I call iris size. I add all the highlights and the iris, and then I keyform it to 2 parameters that I've made again, -1 to 1, called iris bounce 1 and 2. And for 1, I squish the iris inwards at -1 and then pull it outwards for the 1. For the 2, I squish the iris downwards and together for the -1, and then I stretch it up and outwards for the 1. And then I synthesize the corners, and you'll see it looks like it's just doing a jiggle. It creates a cool effect in the physics, trust me. Okay, so for flipping the eye to the other side to get it to match, you need to make sure that you have a deformer that isn't attached to any parameters. So I use the IL overall deformer for this. And you just want to right click and select all child parts of that big deformer. And then you just want to Control C, Control V, and you'll have a nice copy paste of your eye. If you don't use a big overall deformer, you'll end up with a rotation deformer as the copy, and then you won't be able to reflect it into the position you want it to be in. So as you can see here, I've selected everything, I copy it, I paste it, and then I right click on everything that's been highlighted and reflect. Now, what you want to reflect in that little window is the eyeball X, otherwise you'll be looking cross-eyed. And once you've done that, it should reflect right over onto the place where your right eye should be. So you don't have to fiddle about changing where the eye is, up, down, sideways. It will already be exactly in the place you want it to be. It just makes everything so much easier. The only thing you need to do is to go through and rename all of your parts with an R, just so you don't get too confused later. Okay, now as you can see, the IL parameter, open parameter, is controlling both the right eye open and the left eye open. So what you want to do is you want to select all of the parts for the IL open, but the right side. And then you want to right click on that parameter and select change. And then it'll give you your option, like a list of all of your parameters that you have. And you just want to click to change it to the IR open. And that's it. And you just go through and do this with all of your parameters that you need to change from left to right. It's really as simple as that. Okay, so now we're in the physics window. Whew. So all of my physics are already added because I forgot to record it. I'm so sorry. But I'll just talk through the general motions I have for it. So I've added all of the physics parameters that we added. So the eyelash physics, the eyelid physics, the eye highlight physics, and then the iris bounce physics, all onto separate physics groups, essentially. And what you want to do is you want the input to be either IR or IL, depending on which one you're using for that physics. What I find really helpful to do is actually go through and make all of the IL physics pendulum things first, because then you can just duplicate and change the input to IR open and change the output settings to your R equivalent. So you're not having to recreate a whole parameter and copy and paste all of the values that you have for each physics, like pendulum that you're setting between the left and the right, so you get a really nice symmetrical blink. So yeah, I'm just going to go through this and I'll select each of the groups that I've made, and you can take a look at my physics values that I have in the pendulum settings. But my one word of advice for the physics is to just try and test everything out for yourself, because what works for my model might not work for your model. You might want more bounces, you might want less jiggle, you might want a faster jiggle, you might want a slower eye close. It all depends on personal preference, and the best way to test it is to just mess around with the values and see what works. So yeah, this is the result of the eye rigging. I really hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. Again, it was my first time making one, and I'm not very good at speaking into a microphone. It's something I hope to improve on a lot more as I go. But I really hope you found this helpful, and this is me rigging in real time, so feel free to rig along. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me either in the comments or on my Twitter, which will be linked in the bio. Happy rigging! Bye!